Welcome to our Darlington podcast, the podcast where we explore the heart and soul of Darlington through its local independent businesses and the people that make it special. I'm Henry Carver alongside my brother James, and we're here to shine a spotlight on our beloved town. Join us as we sit down with passionate local people to delve into their stories and uncover the unique contributions they make to our community and find out more about the town where we live. Get ready to be inspired by the people and stories that make Darlington truly special.
That was my bit.
I stole it.
Yeah.
How are you doing? You all right?
Yeah, all right, yeah. I asked you to do this because my voice is a little bit croaky this morning.
Yes.
So
yeah.
a bit of man flu going on, so yeah.
Yeah, you haven't mentioned it once.
No, I haven't. No, I'm struggling on, being a very, very brave soldier.
Very much indeed.
Yeah, as my wife prescribed me this morning, some man the F up pills.
Man the F up pills.
Yeah.
Well, she is a medical practitioner.
She is, yeah.
So she's qualified.
Absolutely.
It's been, what, three weeks or so since the last episode?
Yeah.
It seems like an eternity.
The fans have been asking, where's the next episode?
Where's the new podcast?
Yeah.
Where's the new podcast? Well, this is double figures now. This is number 10.
Amazing.
Absolutely incredible.
Very happy with that.
So yeah, congratulations. We're still here.
Yeah.
Who knows what we'll be doing in the next 6 months or so, but hopefully another 10.
Absolutely. And probably a good time to say thank you to the guys at HubSpoke Media for doing such a great job.
Absolutely.
And when we sort of started this podcast, we were had no idea what we're doing. We still
really don't know what we're doing.
But yeah, we've been extremely well looked after by the guys at HubSpoke Media.
Yeah.
So yeah, huge thanks to you all for
absolutely.
For
and Darlington Stream Space has got new mugs as well now.
Ah, yes. So anyone thinking of doing a podcast in and around Darlington, we would thoroughly recommend and get in touch with Adam and the guys. And
absolutely. Do you think they'll give us a free episode because we've just plugged it?
Yes, maybe. We'll see.
We'll see.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So yeah, you've had a week away.
That's why I'm wearing shorts today. I'm dressed like a bit of a beach bum. But hey, you can't see below the table, so it's all absolutely fine.
I've come in business attire with a jacket.
Yeah, well, I've got the benefit of living about 3 or 4 minutes away from the office. So
well, I can't go home to get dressed.
Exactly right. You're 15 minutes away or so.
Yeah.
But yeah, I went to West Wales, Abersoch, which is just beyond Anglesey. I'll say just beyond, probably about 45 minutes to an hour away.
Yeah.
Absolutely beautiful weather. We had a stunning week.
Some of the photos you sent over, it looked like you were in the south of France or Mediterranean
really
or somewhere.
I didn't really know what to expect. I mean, I've been to Snowdonia, but I'd never been to the coastline as such.
Yeah.
And it was just absolutely stunning. I highly recommend it. It's very nice indeed. A lot more affordable than Cornwall, but probably about 2 hours shorter distance as well. So
excellent.
Yeah, a lot of benefits, very much so. We before we went to Abersoch, we popped in to see Steve Chestnut at Harvey's Food Van, becoming a very regular spot for myself and my wife.
Yeah.
She works from home Thursdays, Fridays, so tend to either on a Thursday or Friday
go out for a little treat.
Yeah, exactly. Pick her up and go for a nice bite to eat. Last week, or the week before, was his famous giant Yorkshire puddings filled with sausages and gravy, and it was just
fantastic. I should have loved that.
Absolutely, Yorkshire lass, absolutely. But it was really, really nice indeed. Good. Really, really nice indeed. So I think we had done previously talked about property facts, hadn't we?
Yeah, we'd forgotten a few of those, hadn't we? It's one of my friends, Beth, had recommended that we do a little bit on property as. Yeah. We know a bit about property.
Well, we'd like to think so.
Yeah. So we haven't prepared a fact this morning.
No.
Well, I haven't. Have you?
No, I haven't. Sorry.
No. So, but how is the market? Obviously, a general election has just been called a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
A lot of people have said that the market will just stop and people will sit on their hands. Is that happening?
Well, traditionally, uncertainty in a property market is, people just sit back and see what's happening with the overall political landscape, etc. We haven't seen a drop-off in inquiries. We haven't seen a drop-off in new instructions. We haven't seen a drop-off in offers. Yeah. So, quite simply, there hasn't been any impact whatsoever so far.
Yeah.
I don't think it will actually have an impact in the short term, but who knows what will happen in the coming months.
Do you know what the biggest impact's been?
What's that?
The number of boards around town. Not just estate agents' boards, but there's all the political parties with the boards.
Well, the majority of them are our colours. I say our colours. We're our boards are blue and white, but when we sell the property, obviously they're red. So
most are sold, right?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Most are blue, white, and red.
Yeah.
So it's just adding to our colour scheme, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Very good.
Okie dokie.
Have we got a guest today?
We do have a guest. Should we get straight in?
Excellent.
Pleased to say we have a special treat for our listeners. Joining us is a distinguished guest from the heart of our town's media landscape. He is the chief features writer for the Northern Echo, a publication that has been a cornerstone of Darlington's news for generations. Not only has he earned the prestigious title of Journalist of the Year, but he also brings a deep passion for history that shines through in his engaging columns. We'll be delving into his experiences, the fascinating history of Darlington, and the stories that make our town truly special. Please welcome Chris Lloyd.
Hello, well, a lovely introduction. Thank you very much indeed.
You're more than welcome. Okay. So you're on the other side of things. I mean,
yes.
being a journalist.
A Journalist of the Year.
Journalist of the Year, nonetheless, absolutely. So you're used to sort of having interviews directed towards you, or is this a bit of a unique situation?
It is strange because I am on the other side of the fence at the moment, although I have kind of got used to this because I write about politics as well, and I've somehow kind of become not a spokesperson, but national media organisations like me to try and explain what's going on in a red wall area like ours. So the local elections where the mayor of the Tees Valley, Ben Houchin, was probably the Tories' only success. I did Radio 4, Radio 5, local TV, national TV, Times Radio. For some bizarre reason, I'm really big on BBC Scotland. They like having a red wall correspondent, and I do 10 minutes splurging on a morning sometimes for them. So I have kind of got used to doing this sort of thing, although I prefer having someone as a victim to skewer and ask telling questions
this is our 10th episode, and we got asked our first question back to us in the last episode.
Oh, we were terrible.
We both have a clue what to say. So please do not direct any questions towards us, otherwise it'll probably break us. It'll probably break us. So if you can give us a bit of a backstory in terms of you, really. How did you get into journalism? What's your sort of history?
So I think I always wanted to be a journalist from a very early age, probably from about 7, when I got given a typewriter either for a birthday or Christmas present. It was a light blue Remington portable typewriter, and I was able to tap away and write bizarre stories on it, and I kind of created magazines for my family, which they undoubtedly loved.
Of course they did.
Grandparents were sent them in the post in those days, and wonderful. Wow. And they tried to engage with the bizarre competitions in there. So from that sort of age, I went to university in Scotland, did an English degree, not particularly well because I was far more interested in playing records as a DJ and playing football as a centre forward, and then ended up in sunny Darlow. Got a job
Monty Darlow.
Yes, right. Yeah. I got offered a job as a trainee on the Northern Echo, and that was in the very late 1980s, 1989, 1990, and I've never managed to get away since. So I thought I was going to become the greatest political journalist of my generation. I very fortunately fell in with a young MP here in the early 1990s, who was a bloke MP for Sedgefield. Yeah. So I kind of became his local reporter for a while.
Tony Blair?
Tony Blair, that's right, yeah.
Yes!
So I was with him, or watched his ascent, and I didn't really need to go to London because he brought American presidents to me. Yeah, which was just quite amazing, really.
Wow.
And so that kind of salved some of my desire to be politics. And I also got into local history. Because I arrived here not knowing this area at all, having whizzed through it on the East Coast Main Line on the train, and I tried to work out why it exists. And why the Northern Echo, which is almost unique as a regional newspaper in selling more copies in its heyday than the population of the town in which it was based. Wow. Trying to work out how that kind of came about, that bizarre accident, and how Darlington should be a kind of provincial town, and yet historically punching above its weight, and why that should be. And then I discovered that people would much rather engage with stories about their local street, their local school, their local area, and their local village or town than they would about me pontificating about politics. And that's part of the reason you become a journalist, is to engage with people, to get them to kind of read and interact with what you are doing. And so I built up a huge army of followers and people who regularly send me so much material that it keeps all of my columns kind of rolling on in the paper as we kind of work out the history and preserve the stories of the area as well, which I think is really, really important, because if Darlington doesn't have a history, if it doesn't have unique buildings, if it doesn't have weird and wonderful characters to celebrate, then it's just another town. And I think it's really important to preserve that identity.
Absolutely. Quite a lot to go out there. That's an incredible sort of introduction. Yeah, absolutely. The first thing I think you glossed over was American presidents.
Oh, yeah. So I was the only print journalist in the pub at Sedgefield when George Bush came to Tony Blair's mansion, the Mirabella House. I remember I was just, there was a green outside Mirabella House playing field where Air Force One, the giant Black Sikorsky helicopter, landed, and the whole area was fringed by police, by Secret Service people with kind of weird walkie-talkies and things coming out of their ear. And the downdraft, I was warned before by an American serviceman that the downdraft is something special. And all the American servicemen that were ringing the fields kind of were there, crouching holding their hats on. And I genuinely remember seeing a British policeman who had an Alsatian on a lead. And as the helicopter came down, the Alsatian went up like an umbrella because of the downdraft. And he was holding the dog kind of above his head like an umbrella.
Mary Poppins.
Yeah. So and this is part of my problem. All my kind of political stories seem to not illuminating about the politics. They're all about dogs as umbrellas and that sort of thing. But I like that sort of thing. So. But anyhow, yeah. So that was George Bush coming to sunny Sedgefield. Yeah.
Wow. So any other sort of famous and important people that you've met over the years?
Oh, right. Well, I was very disappointed in Liz Truss being Prime Minister for 5 weeks, because she is the only Prime Minister I haven't interviewed. I did John Major. Yep. So since John Major, I've done all of them, yeah. So, and we had Keir Starmer in our office in Darlington a couple of weeks ago. Yeah. And just to show I sit nicely on the fence, when Rishi Sunak became MP for Richmond, he came out rather surprisingly, as I thought he was a proper Cameroonian for Brexit very early doors, and he did a couple of town hall meetings across his constituency talking to his constituents, and I chaired a couple of those as he explained his Brexit, why he was supporting Brexit. So and it's great. That's one of the fascinating things of my job, I think, is that I get to kind of meet all these people kind of up front, and you only get a few minutes with them, but it is quite revealing. When I did, I chaired up in Newcastle a couple of Labour leadership hustings, and so in the green room, I kind of got speaking to people, and I remember Jeremy Corbyn, before he became Labour leader, he kind of was speaking to me. And just remember he had a huge breast pocket full of bits of paper and glasses and things. So it's about 2 inches out of his chest. And that's really, really odd. And he spent a long time talking at me. And then he finished it by saying, and the answer, of course, is no more war. And he spun away on his feet and just disappeared. I thought, yeah, that's wonderful. How I'd love a world of no more war. But are we going to manage it by voting Labour to get an entire planet free of war? And that really became kind of part of the problem with Jeremy Corbyn was that although you may well buy into some of those ideals of a completely peace world,
the practicalities of it are far different.
Absolutely, yeah. So although they're only kind of micro, a few seconds of time, you do get a feeling. Another one, that same similar event, we were walking through to go onto the stage at one of the museums in Newcastle. I had David Miliband in front of me, and Ed Balls, and then Ed Miliband just behind me. And as we were walking through, I felt what I thought was a kind of a fly kind of buzzing around me. And I kind of batted it, and then I batted it again. And it was only a few seconds later that I realised it was actually Ed Miliband pulling on my jacket, trying to say, "Hi, I'm Ed Miliband." And I thought, well, he didn't make that much of an impression on me, so how's he going to make an impression on the British voting public? And he didn't. so although it's only a microcosm, you do kind of get a bit of an insight in these things.
Well, that's incredible, incredible. And you mentioned as well, sort of passing Darlington on the train. I've had that comment in the past, actually, from a business owner who came to Darlington specifically from London, who said, "Oh, I didn't even realise it was as big a town as this, because it's just a stop on the train line to Newcastle or Edinburgh." What were your first impressions on the town when you initially came here?
Well, I don't know if I really came with any expectation. I am a southerner by birth. Went to university in Scotland, and the whole of the north of England was a complete blank canvas to me. So I think I arrived without any real preconceptions. I remember my interview with the Northern Echo. I wore a very bad brown suit, and I arrived a little bit early, so I went for a pint in the Turk's Head in Bondgate. So that was my introduction to sunny Darlow. I think it's because I come almost as an outsider that I've become so interested in what the town is and why it exists and why that building looks like that and not like something else, and who's the weird bloke on the statue in the middle of town who's always seeking for his wallet in his breast pocket. Why is he there? Why does he look like that? And so those are the questions that I wanted to answer for myself, and I discovered that so many thousands of other people also want similar sort of answers.
Well, can you give us a bit more information about said statue? Joseph Pease, I assume you're referring to.
Yeah.
Well, I'll let you.
Well, Joseph Pease is, I think, undoubtedly Darlington's greatest son, in that he was the son of Edward, the father of the railways Pease, who, with George Stephenson, created the Stockton-Darlington Railway, which is going to be 200 years old next year, where Darlington should be a global focus of celebration. Joseph, Edward's son, he helped draw up the prospectus for the Stockton-Darlington Railway when he was very, very young. He has the first coal mine, really, that the Peases owned in South Durham. He becomes South Durham's first MP after the Great Reform Act of the 1832. He is the bloke who single-handedly invents Middlesbrough. He was sailing down the mouth of the Tees on a boat one day, the dreary salt plains, all those wastes of mud, and he had a vision of a kind of a big seaport there. And so he said it will be Eremus, which is Middlesbrough's motto to this day. He had the first blast furnace in Middlesbrough that creates Middlesbrough's iron and steel industry. And so he made a fortune of about £168 million in his lifetime. He lived in Southend, which is now Duncan Bannatyne's New Grange Hotel, which was Darlington's most opulent mansion. He had, in his conservatory, he had 40 canaries flapping about. No one else in Darlow had seen a canary, and yet he had 40 of them there. So he's a fascinating fellow in many, many ways, not least that towards the end of his life he lost the use of his eyes. He went blind, and there's an in his obituary in the Northern Echo, there's an extraordinary line that says he went to an oculist in Paris to seek assistance, and he had an iridectomy, which the Northern Echo of 1871 or something explains is he had the veins in his eyeballs extended and clipped off. And then it says, without anaesthetic. And then the simple sentence next is, he suffered much. And that's the sentence, and
wow.
It didn't work. It didn't work after all of that. But I love the fact, and this is I love the fact that you know where the hotel is,
yeah.
And now the approach to it is lined by Southend Avenue.
Yeah.
And just as you get to the hotel, there's a block of fairly newish apartments, 60s, 70s, I should think.
Yeah.
And they keep their bins in Joseph Pease's summer house. You can still see it's built in behind the flats, and because he was he was effectively blind, he would kind of come down towards the end of his life from the hotel and sit in the south-facing summer house and feel the warmth of the sun on his face. And it's a wonderful little bit of sandstone with castellations across the top. And you can still see that to this day, and that's where they keep their bins.
So the flats were the gardens?
Yes.
Yeah. Was there a big lake there at some stage?
So, Green Park is really Joseph Pease's back garden. He had a boating lake at the foot of the hill there. If you go down the scurrier-bricked back lanes of that area, you can see his ornamental paddock house, which is a half-timbered building that's been converted into a nice property now. And he had a fountain in the boating lake, or in his little lake there, which is now the one at the back of Houndgate, where outside Central Hall, opposite number 13 Townhouse, that place. Yeah. So that's from his parkland there. Although I think originally it started off in the centre of Tubwell Row, but because it spewed water out in Tubwell Row onto the earthen streets, and you had all the horses and carts going past, that wasn't a very good way of kind of creating a stable town centre road, so they hoofed it out, I think, to Joseph's house, and then it came back to the town centre.
Yeah, we're talking about properties. There's some fantastic architecture in Darlington, isn't there? Have you got any sort of favourite buildings?
Well, I have loads of favourite buildings. My favourite architect, I've got two top architects. Alfred Waterhouse, who is the greatest Gothic architect of the Victorian era. His first contracts outside of his native Manchester were for the Pease and the Backhouse families, building their Backhouse's magnificent bank on High Row, Barclays now, creating the covered market complex with the iconic, and that word is overused, but the iconic clock tower, which is the emblem of Darlington, that's a Waterhouse. Indeed, that's it there.
Move my head out the way of it.
And of course, the covered market, this is a wonderful story, I think. So it's a deeply controversial for the Peases and the Backhouses to build the covered market complex, because the townspeople didn't want their broad open marketplace being built on, and they didn't want a new town hall where they felt the councillors would just sit in comfort and luxury and spout nonsense all day, and they didn't understand why they needed a ridiculous clock tower reaching up to the moon, and so it's very, very unpopular. So the Peases rushed it open, I think, to kind of vent to end the bad publicity, and they held the Royal Agricultural Society's show in there, Northern Counties Fat Cattle and Poultry Society show in there, in 1862, I'm guessing, and people came from miles around. Literally, the winner of the prize ox came from Aberdeen. Loads of people were crammed in there, along with these massive mountains of beef and 815 cages of poultry, stalls of ham and bacon and everything. Women in their wide whalebone skirts in there, and the floor of the half-built market kind of gives way, and it plummets 12 men and 3 cattle into the cellars below. The DNS's, Darlington Stockton Times' report is fantastic because it is more interested in the fate of the most important animals involved in this disaster, which are clearly the cattle for the DNS, which is a farmer's Bible. And so it tells its readers that they are numbers 27, 28 and 29 in the show catalogue, and they're completely unharmed. Which is good news. Then it turns its attention to the 10 men who are in the hole, one of whom is Mr. Robert Robson, a farmer from Newton Morell near Barton, and it describes his face is ashy pale as he's dragged out of the hole, and the reporter can see his broken right thigh bone protruding through his skin. So the local doctor, Dr. Hazelwood, gets some towels, wraps the legs together as a splint, puts poor old Mr. Robson into a horse-drawn cart that drags him across the cobbles of a high road, bouncing him to a friend's house where he rallies enough to make his will and then resigns himself to his inevitable fate, and he dies 2 days later. So imagine this controversy, this project that nobody wanted, has killed a popular local farmer in its first event. There is hell on. There is an inquiry, a proper inquest into all of this, and Mr. Waterhouse, the architect, he is blamed for defective arches that failed to hold up the floor. The Peases, though, seem to have regrouped very quickly and got all their eminent engineers off the railway, and they seem to have rebuilt the architect's plans in wood in the marketplace. And then I think they got everyone to jump up and down on top of their model, and when it didn't crash, they said, that proves that the architect's plans are completely right. And they happened to get their eminent engineers to analyse the iron girders that had been put in to hold up the market, and they discovered that in the beam that had given way, plunging the cattle and the men to their fate, a flaw had been rolled in, a bit of impurity. And the poor old iron founder, Mr. William Hodgson, he was neither a member of the Liberal Party, like the Peases and Backhouse, he was not related to the Peases and Backhouses by marriage, and so he got the blame. And Mr. Waterhouse, the great architect, was exonerated. He never again built in cast iron, but went on to do things like the Natural History Museum in South Kensington in London, which, if you stand and look at Barclays Bank on High Row, and then stand and look at the Natural History Museum, the two are really quite similar. Darlington's obviously on a bit of a smaller scale.
Just a little bit.
Just a little bit. But kind of the arches and the ideas, you can see that he just kind of magnified High Row and put it in the middle of London. So he did the largest stately home in Victorian England for the Duke of Westminster. I think it's called Eaton House in Cheshire. So he was chair of the Royal Institute of British Architects. So he really is a great figure for Darling to have associated, as well as, I think, a fantastic story. And his pupil is G.G. Hoskins, who is Darlington's greatest kind of local architect, who starts as Waterhouse's clerk of works on the Rockcliffe estate at Herworth, building that, and then gets his first contract, which is building Herworth Village Hall. And then he goes on to do most of the mansions around Darlington, plus the library, the sixth form college in Bain Terrace, the technical college in Northgate, which has got wonderful statues on the top of it. Yeah. And his best building, I think, is the King's Head Hotel in the centre of Darlington. Again, a real kind of a statement of Darlington as this great northern powerhouse, just like Barclays and the Covered Market Complex is. And Hoskins's greatest building, I think, is Middlesbrough Town Hall, which is an extraordinary Gothic palace of a building. So he really has created Darlington's kind of Victorian melodramatic sort of feel, I think. So yeah, he's one of my heroes.
That's not a bad answer. Brilliant stuff. Absolutely fascinating. I'm hooked on every single word. I could continue going down the architecture route, I'd quite like to ask, how far back in your research have you actually discovered Darlington's roots? How's it come about as a town?
So Darlington is probably Dieuther's Tun. So Dieuther would have been some form of a Saxon person, and a Tun, T-U-N-T-O-N, town, is a kind of a settlement. There are all sorts of weird theories about how Darlington settled. Some people think that Bulmer's Stone in Northgate, opposite Edward Pease's house, is really, really important because early nomadic people would have seen it and thought that it shouldn't be here. It's an erratic porphyry from the top of Chat Fell that kind of hitched arrived on a glacier and ended up there, and they would have seen it as some sort of magical thing, and perhaps that was why they chose to settle around it. But that's just a fantastic story. It is a brilliantly magical stone. There's another story that it strikes 12 turns 12 times roundabout every midnight as well, but I've never managed to see that happening. But people do think it has magical properties, so that possibly could be why Darlington grew up, but really it was just a natural settlement on a crossing of the river, I should imagine, and water being very important, fresh water. And then Darlington kind of grew up both on the Great North Road, was a coaching inn, but most people don't, I think, realise that Darlington is really a mill town at its heart. For some reason I don't understand, the waters in this area of the Skern and the Tees were brilliant for washing sheep's fleeces. And so fleeces come from as far away as central Scotland, from Lincolnshire, to be washed in our magical waters. So if you look at the villages like Aycliffe Village or Herworth, that they are kind of centred on their rivers, and they are weaving and that sort of town. And so Darlington's North Road area along the river there is all about flax dress, about fleece washing and that sort of thing. And that's how Darlington then kind of, originally that was a cottage industry with people passing it from house to house and the money following along. And then the Peases and the Backhouse families decide that they're going to apply industrial technology, steam power to it. So they build 2 mills in the centre of Darlington. Backhouses was opposite St Cuthbert's Church, underneath the Ring Road now. Peases Mill was where TK Maxx, the Sports Direct multi-storey car park is. And so they bring all the processes in-house, and they also take command of the money chain as well, which is how Backhouses develops into a bank, because they're kind of looking after the finances. And the mills become Darlington's biggest employer. And during the Napoleonic Wars, Pease's Mill makes lots of 15 years worth of military uniforms to fight the French with, even though Edward Pease, as a Quaker, is a pacifist and so completely against war. But he's also a businessman employing probably 25% of the town's population, and sees that there is some money to be made out of this war. And he actually retires in 1817, just after the end of the Napoleonic Wars, and he's got this great big stash of cash sitting in his bank account. And just like I think most men, when they kind of reach that retirement age with a few pennies, they think, what sort of kind of boyish pursuit can I follow with this cash? So he decides to create the world's largest train set, which becomes the Stockton and Darlington Railway. So you can see things kind of move on from being a mill town then into a railway town. And that's really where the covered market complex comes into things, because that is then required to prove that Darlington is this northern powerhouse. It needs this great big municipal statement of its arrival, which is why the Peases and the Backhouses get my friend Mr. Waterhouse in to design a wonderful municipal complex for the centre of the town.
Mm. And you touched on Joseph Pease being a Quaker.
Yeah.
What did that mean back in the day?
So they were non-conformists. They weren't Anglicans. They weren't Catholics. So they were kind of outsiders. They were therefore regarded by the establishment as being rather dangerous characters, which is why their meeting houses are usually quite secluded. They were very, very simple people. They dressed very simply. They didn't indulge in ridiculous pleasures like presenting podcasts or something like that. They wouldn't have any trouble with that sort of malarkey. You're better at home studying your Bible than spouting rubbish. So they're very kind of simple folk like that. They were not able to take part originally in local politics. They were not able to go to university, so they study sensible things like botany. The backhouses to this day have loads of daffodils named after them, because that was one of their pursuits that they were able to follow. There's a wonderful Quaker who lived in North Road, a Mr. Robson, who has a North American gooseberry named after him, a Robsonia, but that's a story for another day. They were almost, the Quakers, they were almost a puritanical cult, and they didn't like to go. People were not allowed to marry outside the cult, and they did all their businesses within their faith as well. And so they create a really interesting business model, really. And the Peases, when they are creating the Stockton-Darlington Railway, are able to draw on wealthy Quakers across the country, like the Gurney family from East Anglia, and it is their ability to access capital cheaply that is part of the reason for their success in creating the Stockton and Darlington Railway. So, so there are all sorts of different angles of Quakerness that make Darlington so interesting. And whenever I write about the Quakers, I give talks in the Friends Meeting House, and I can sometimes hear them spinning in their graves out the back as I slag them off, because they're fascinating, because they are these really puritanical types, and yet they have this, they are also very human, and so they, although the Peases were great teetotalers and temperance types, because if you're running a railway, it is not very good if all your engine drivers are turning up for work drunk out of their trees. So you don't want them to drink at all, so they create lots of temperance organisations. But of course, Joseph in Duncan Bannatyne's New Grange Hotel had apparently the finest wine cellar in the north of England, but he could just have a nice glass of Prosecco or whatever on a Sunday lunch and be completely responsible, whereas you can't really trust the workers. So there are all sorts of really interesting, I think, kind of dynamics going on in the Peases and the way the Quakers were able to be so paternalistic, avuncular, kind of telling people how to run their lives. It's fascinating the way the people rebel. I've got loads of stories about, so theatres are really, really interesting, because the Peases hated theatres for moral and religious and spiritual and political reasons. So they seem to me to have spent years trying to suppress Darlington's theatrical community, which encouraged Darlington's theatrical community to be even more persistent. And the Peases, I think, went to incredible lengths to stop theatres. I think they actually sabotaged Darlington's first wooden barn theatre, which was on the Green Tree Fields at the back of Skinnergate. The theatre impresario had kind of fought all planning restrictions that the Peases had imposed to build this wooden barn theatre, and then he had needed to get a supply of gas to illuminate his stage, and so he applied to the Darlington Gas and Water Company for a supply of gas, and that company is, of course, owned by the Peases, and they seem to me to have fitted him up with a dodgy gas meter through which there was a hole in the top as they tried to prevent the theatre from operating properly. He, being a showbiz man, says the show must always go on, so he attaches a length of India rubber pipe to go around the dodgy gas meter, so the lights in the theatre work through the gas supply. The Peases, of course, get him arrested for tampering with the gas meter. He's sent up to Durham. My newspapers produce special Saturday morning editions of the great gas stealing case of Darlington, as the Peases are portrayed as trying to suppress the town's theatrical interests and entertainment and just kind of be a damp cloth on everything. The theatre man is found guilty. The judge says, well, the judge points out that to get a supply of gas, the theatre man had to put down a £15 deposit to the gas company. So that's more than enough to cover a year's supply of gas to the Wooden Theatre. So he had felt that he had paid up front for the gas, and he was just merely getting around that hole in the meter by putting that pipe around the meter that obviously prevented it from operating. So the judge says, I'm going to look at this pretty leniently because he's paid and someone installed this dodgy meter. So I sentence him to 1 month's hard labour, which seems to me to be a pretty tough sentence for merely facilitating the distribution of gas you've already paid for. So how did we get onto that? How did we get onto that? I have no idea. Yes, the dichotomy. Yes, I love the kind of dilemmas that looking at them and throws up, because they are, on the one hand, this really puritanical, strict, law-abiding sort of a group, and then on the other hand, they are kind of indulging in this, what I think is great, fascinating subterfuge to maintain their own power in the town.
Talking about the Quakers being teetotalers and giving us the reasons for all that, which I didn't know, isn't there, I'm going back to my sort of primary school years now, a law that restricts within the West End of Darlington, any public houses because of the Quakers?
Yes, no, I've heard that as well.
Yep.
And it is true.
Yep.
That until you get to Baydale Beck, which is on the west side of the beck there, so possibly outside a parish boundary. Parish boundaries are usually some sort of natural feature like that. There aren't any pubs. I've never seen it, though, written, and you will know, I will ask you this, have you seen any deeds of West End properties that ban pubs, outhouses and that sort of thing?
Public house?
Yeah.
I think I have, you know.
Have you?
Yeah, I think I have. I live in exactly that location.
Oh, right, yeah,
I'm sure
yeah.
there's something going back. 2016, I'm pretty sure there is something in there, but I'll have to bring out the deeds again.
Yeah. Because the deeds often kind of prevent you from having abattoirs and that sort of thing there.
Keeping chickens or whatever.
Which is a natural thing. But I don't think I've seen a religious reason. And this is all again part of the wonderful dichotomy of the Quakers, is because although they were completely temperance and against alcohol and that sort of thing, they set up, Darlington has the world's first railway pub, the Railway Tavern in Northgate, which the Peases themselves created within a year or two of the opening of the Stockton and Darlington Railway. And that is because the railway, which was originally designed to carry coal and minerals, people were using it. And so where do people go when they're waiting for a train? No one had ever thought about that before. And so the Peases had the good idea, well, we'll just kind of build a refreshment room of some sort. And people obviously want a few beers, so we'll have a little brewery out the back. And so the Railway Tavern is a wonderful bit of local history because it is a proto-station, they call it. Because before passenger stations had evolved, no one had created the concept. This was the first attempt at some form of waiting room for people, and the Peases seem to have been quite happy for it to sell alcohol to the passengers, even though they were temperance types. But I guess they could see that the wet sails were helping to kind of finance the whole building enterprise, so they didn't need to pay for it to be constructed.
If the Peases and George Stephenson, etc., of that era could see Darlington now and what it's become and what it's soon to Obviously it's evolving as we speak as well, with the train station being developed, with the rail heritage quarter being developed at Hopetown, in line with the 200-year anniversary as well. What do you think they would say? What do you think they would think?
I think they would. That is an interesting question.
There's the skewers.
Yeah. So I think they would be astonished at the way things have evolved. I mean, the locomotion number 1 on opening day went about 8 miles an hour. And people thought eyeballs would pop out and all this sort of stuff, and it didn't happen. And cows didn't stop producing milk as this whizzed past at a snail's pace. And so they would be amazed by our digital revolution, where we can kind of be in touch with the other side of the world within seconds. So they would have been amazed at that. They were pretty proud, I think, of the town that had created them. I think the Pease family deliberately gave locomotion number 1, the world's first proper passenger engine, to North Road Station to be mounted on a plinth there as early as the 1850s, in recognition of the central part that the town played in this world-changing technology. And so that's why I was very disappointed when Darlington lost control of that engine to Shildon for weird historical reasons. And it is interesting that the way society has developed, because the Darlington entrepreneurs like to keep everything in-house, locally, and have their own control of it. And yet now Darlington has lost all of its is no longer the hub of, say, the railway industry. That's all kind of disappeared, no longer the hub of manufacturing industries. And I think they would be disappointed that provincial life and the importance of provincial institutions has changed, and therefore we lose our individual importance as a town, which goes back to my earlier point, is why I think it's important to keep these kind of stories burning and alive, because otherwise we're just going to have a bland town full of the same charity shops and no real identity and individuality. So we need to cherish weird things like a ridiculous clock tower in the centre of town.
Absolutely. We're about 40 minutes in already. This is
I'm just getting going. I'm starting.
This has absolutely flown by, and it's absolutely fascinating. Have you any questions at all? Well, first, while we've got Chris in front of us,
I think we could quite easily go on for another 40 minutes plus. So, would you be prepared to come back for another conversation in a few months' time?
Oh,
Chris?
I'd be delighted to. Yes, you can't shut me up once.
Some of those stories.
Love the fact you've asked him on.
Absolutely, yeah. Let's get you booked in. Have you got your diary with you now? No, that was absolutely incredible. And we've been born in Darlington, grown up in Darlington, but just to know some of the history and sort of the research that you've done, really interesting. Is a lot of the stories, it feels like you're telling them firsthand. I know you're not that old. Is it from the archives of the Echo and the DNS that you're getting a lot of this information?
So I do a 12-page local history supplement in the Northern Echo every week, and 2 pages in the Darlington Stockton Times. I've written about 10 books on Sunny Darlow. I'm usually out, my wife would say, every night of the blooming week, giving talks on around the area, so you can kind of come across me in various places. So my research, Darlington Library, which has been brilliantly refurbished recently, classic G.G. Hoskins building, absolutely marvellous. They've got a really good local studies section, so a lot of my stuff starts off there. I love old newspapers and the melodramatic descriptions in them, so I kind of ferret things out of there. And I have a wonderful army of readers, both in newspapers and indeed online, and people who come to talks, who give me all sorts of wonderful snippets. I'm just working on one at the moment which someone has pointed me to and never seems to have been told properly before, about the building of the bridge over the River Tees at Lloydinsdale. I don't know if you know that bridge, next to the Gersby
church.
Daffodil. That's right there. And it looks as if two men fell to their deaths during the construction of the bridge and was swept away. And I'm just kind of going back through old newspapers at the moment, and it is true. And I'm just kind of working that up into a story. But it's not mentioned in any of the kind of established histories of bridges, I don't think. So it's just kind of been a folk story that a couple of readers have kind of pointed me in the direction of, and so I'm kind of seeing if it's true and fleshing it out, and it looks quite an interesting little tale. I love a good death.
You come across a few of those in history books, don't you?
Yeah, you do.
I've got one last question. What's been your most favourite story that you've ever covered and written about?
I love all of the stories. So I will very quickly tell you my favourite railway story, which is Jonathan Backhouse, the head banker in Darlington. So the Duke of Cleveland, he was against the railway in 1819 because he was mad keen on fox hunting. He lived in Raby Castle, and he feared that if one of these horrible, nasty, dirty, clattering steam trains went across his land, it would scare his foxes away and he would have nothing to go out and hunt. So he decided he had to stop the railway from happening. First of all, he tried parliamentary reasons to derail the railway, and when that didn't work, he, I think, came up with a dastardly plan, because in those days, it used to say on the back of the pound note, I promise to pay the bearer on demand £1 of gold bullion. You could take your banknotes to the bank and demand that the bank turn them into gold. So he ordered all of the tenants of Teesdale to collect up Backhouse's banknotes secretly, and so he would get this enormous pile and go to High Row unannounced and demand that those banknotes are changed into gold bullion, knowing full well they wouldn't have enough gold in High Row, and so the bank would go bankrupt. It was bankrolling the railway, so the railway would collapse, and his foxes would live happily, untroubled by trains, until he went out and chased them. Jonathan Backhouse, the head banker, he got wind of this dastardly plan. He dashed down the Great North Road in his horse and cart, went round all the Quaker banks of London, collected as much gold bullion as he possibly could, piled it into his horse and cart, and came dashing back up the Great North Road until he got to Croft Bridge, where one of the wheels came off his wagon. Okay. Now, this is really dramatic, because the agent of the Duke is in High Row with this bag full of banknotes, about to crash the bank, crash the railway, save the foxes. Jonathan, though, is a very resourceful fellow. He realises that if he takes the gold bullion off the broken front axle and piles it up onto the good rear axle, it'll bring up. And so, doing a wheelie, he clings, does the 3 miles into Darlow, and is there, sweating a bit, but he's there as the Duke's agent arrives. He exchanges all of the Teesdale banknotes into cash, into gold. He even has a little pile of it left at the end of the deal. And as the Duke of Cleveland's agent walks out the door, he shouts over to him, "If thy master will sell me Raby Castle, I will pay for it with the same metal," which is a wonderful way of flicking 2 fingers up on a nasty top as he disappears. But this story is supposed to be absolutely true. In the Backhouse's archives, they now are now with Barclays Bank. It says that in 1819, I think it's June 1819, Jonathan goes to Bank London for cash, £32,000. The next month, there is an entry for a wheel that was demolished on Croft Bridge for £1.06, I think it is, off the top of my head. So for that quid, that saved the railway. And this gives rise to the worst pun, I think, in local history, as the act of moving the bullion off the broken front axle onto the good rear axle is known as how the head banker balanced the cash.
Very good.
That's fantastic.
That is absolutely outstanding. Yeah. On that note, Chris, genuinely, that has been absolutely fascinating. So thank you so much for coming in. James has already penciled you in for the next one in very, very bold, in ink, basically. So yeah, thank you very much for your time today. And
Great pleasure.
Thank you so much indeed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Chris.